Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're getting very close to the gala, but we've got a couple of great talks for you this afternoon. So that the speakers can have maximum time, we'll just bring them right up. The first speaker is going to be Marylène Gagne from Curtin University, and she's done a tremendous amount of work over the years on SDT and work environments and rewards and all kinds of stuff. So let's welcome Marylène up.
Hello, everyone. This is working. Yeah, you can hear me. So today I'm going to talk about a sort of exploratory study that we did in the past year on examining how algorithmic management influences the motivation of gig workers. So to get started, I just want to mention the colleagues that have done this with me. So there's Xavier Parent-Rochelot from HEC Montréal. Mark Griffith, who was the head, he's no longer in that position, but at the time was the head of Insights and Impact at Collective Benefits. So Collective Benefits is an insurance company in the UK that insure gig workers. So they provide them with leave, like insurance for medical leave and all of those kinds of things. And Emily, who was an honors student who worked on the project with me. So algorithmic management, let me explain a little bit in case you haven't heard too much about this. An algorithm, as many of you know, is a computational formula based on statistical models using data. It's often designed with artificial intelligence to allow for the automatic updating of these algorithms with the addition of new data. So it's can be continuously updating. And it is increasingly being used to replace, either partially or completely, an increasing number of management functions. We can typically think of gig work, but increasingly also in traditional organizations, it is introduced to help manage employees. On gig work platforms, algorithms are often used to automate the matching of workers with potential clients. So it can assign the tasks to employees, well, not employees, gig workers. It can assign work schedules. It can monitor the work or the behaviors of the workers. And that monitoring is then, so the gathering of data through monitoring is then used to make decisions to assess the worker's performance. And often that can lead to how they get compensated. So it can make decisions on how the worker will be compensated. Parent-Rochelot and Parker, a few years ago, published this paper analyzing how algorithmic management influences or redesigns jobs. And from that, they also, not discovered, but analyzed it so that they figured that three aspects are quite important in the determination of the impact of algorithmic management on the reactions of the workers. One is how transparent the algorithms are. So are the users informed about what data is used and how it is used to make decisions? Also on the appropriateness of the data, the criteria, the formula that are considered relevant and accurate by the workers that will have an impact on how they react to algorithmic management. And finally, whether they have any control over it. Can they input into the design of the algorithm? Can they appeal decisions made by the algorithm? Can they have the option to turn it on or off? For example, could they turn on or off certain monitoring of certain behaviors or feedback that they're given or the timing of when they get it? So kind of like the amount of control they can have over that. Last year, we published a paper similar to the one from Parent-Rochelot and Parker, but analyzing, using a systematic literature review of existing research on algorithmic management, how it might influence motivation. And we analyzed it, of course, with self-determination theory, and focusing on how the needs might be influenced by certain algorithmic management functions, such as monitoring, performance appraisal, task assignment, and how transparent, appropriate they are, whether if people have control over the algorithms, how that would impact things. And these are kind of the predictions that we made in the paper. So I'm not going to go through them because I'd rather show you results of a first exploratory study that we did. But this is kind of like if you want to read about the state of the literature and the kinds of arguments we had, you can see this paper. So today, I'm focusing more on task assignment and pay determination by algorithms in what I'm going to talk to you about. The reason I chose those two is that in the preliminary data analysis, we discovered that monitoring functions and performance appraisal functions were not related to a lot of variables around need satisfaction, motivation, and outcomes. So that's why I'd rather kind of dig into the ones that seem to be more related and focus on that. And so for both task assignment and pay determination, we also looked at the perceptions of the workers on how transparent they found these functions to be, how appropriate. But we didn't look at user control because we were focusing on gig workers, and typically they don't have much control at all on the platform, the gig work platform. So instead, we focused on another aspect that we felt was probably important from a self-determination theory point of view, which is how contingent is task assignment and pay determination on your past performance. So we looked at this aspect. The method that we use is we use Prolific, and poor Mark Griffith, my co-author, went through the streets of London with pamphlets and a QR code to get gig workers to fill out our survey. So we have data from the UK, Canada, USA, Australia, and New Zealand. We asked people to tell us about the gig work platform they use most often, and people ended up giving us data on 49 different platforms. And this is what we wanted. We wanted heterogeneity of platforms so we could look at variation in the features and the functions of different platforms. So we cover online and on-site work. So online could be, you create logos on your computer. On-site would be Uber or delivery services. On some platforms, the workers chose their tasks. On other platforms, the app offered them tasks. On some platforms, worker determined their own pay rates. On other platforms, the app determined that. And the different platforms also had a variety of monitored data and performance criteria that they were using. So quite a nice heterogeneity there. The measures we use, we had all of this, but I'm only focusing on the bold ones today. So task assignment, which also included some questions around nudging. So I'll explain later what that is and how it's done. And compensation. We also asked people to report on transparency, appropriateness, and performance contingency related to each of these. Need satisfaction, burnout, and turnover intentions. We have motivation, but I haven't dug into the analyses enough right now, so I'm just going to present, and I wanted something more simple to present, otherwise it's just too much to digest, so I'm going to focus on need satisfaction today. In terms of the sample, I think it's important for you to understand what kind of sample characteristics we have. So more or less equal in terms of gender distribution. You can see that the average age is not very old, and it was slightly slanted towards, in terms of the distribution, towards more the 20s, like 20 to 30 years old. Tenure is not very high. People typically don't work that long on platforms, so over 70% of them was 2 years or less than 2 years. 50% reported that they use gig work as an income supplement, not necessarily their main source of income. And 46% of them actually had bachelor's degree. So they were kind of highly young, highly educated and quite young, and not necessarily using this as a main form of employment. So you get the picture in your head of who the sample is. You can also see where what type of platform they worked on. So the majority was transport delivery and online on-site creative work. You can see that there are other types of gig work platforms for all kinds of work, and it's just expanding all the time. More and more types of work can be done as gig work. So in terms of examining task assignment and pay determination, we both looked ourselves as a research team on the websites and any information we could get on these platforms online to try to determine whether the platform would assign tasks and determine pay, or whether the workers had some control over it. So we coded them for that, but in addition, we asked the workers to report on it. As you can see, people are sort of accurate in their assessments, but you see some differences as well, and some of them are quite drastic. And fortunately, and this is something I highly recommend when you do surveys, is we had a comment box after the questions on the algorithmic management functions, asking them to tell us anything else that they think we should know about the platform itself. And from there, we could understand the differences a little bit more. So at the bottom, you see two little notes that I put. Platforms that we determine do not assign tasks, so workers can choose their tasks. People often reported that some of the platforms show them a list of tasks based on their past performance, so they might have more or less choice depending on how good they apparently are according to the platform. So in a way, it's more of a continuum in terms of task assignment rather than a yes-no in terms of who determines what type of work you'll be able to do. The other thing is that people who said that they determined their own pay rates, there were lots of comments saying that they often had to lower their rates to get any work at all. It was really competitive. So I think you have to keep this in mind when I show you the results, because these aspects of task assignment and compensation really influence the results. In terms of the features of the algorithmic management functions, from the information we got from the websites, you can see that transparency, appropriateness, and appraisals of how fair things are being done, we also assessed that for them, didn't really vary according to whether tasks were assigned by the app or the workers chose them. And for pay determination, the only difference that we found is that people felt that the pay determination was more contingent on performance when they determined their own pay rate, which probably relates again to what I just told you on the previous slide, which is they feel that it's highly competitive and it forces them to lower their rates in general. So overall, you can see that the use of algorithmic management, at least for gig workers, is not seen as something that is illegitimate or unjust in itself. In terms of how workers report how much the algorithms determine their tasks or their pay, you can see that the more they think that an algorithm determines their tasks, the more appropriate they actually find this to be, and the more they perceive a contingency on their past performance. So that's also interesting. In terms of pay determination, there wasn't too much going on, except like that little finding that performance contingencies were perceived to be lower when they determined their own pay, just like in the previous slide, rather than when the app assigns their pay. I wanted to show you this graph of need satisfaction levels because I think it's quite interesting in itself. So in terms of autonomy and competence, you can see some differences between the type of app work that people do. But I don't think that's the most interesting thing. I mean, we can look at that and we can look at differences between these groups. But what's striking is that relatedness is quite low. And I think this is a bit different from what you would see on the average traditional type of employment. Keep that in mind because when you see the results, relatedness matters quite a bit. So results for task assignment. So as I said, we had two ways of measuring the extent to which algorithmic management was assigning tasks. So we had our own website assessments, and then these were the items that we used to assess self-report. So they're kind of coded backwards. So when tasks were assigned by the app, it was coded as 0, and when the worker was assigning their own tasks, it was coded as 1. So they're kind of like reverse of one another. But what we found is that our own assessment of whether the app assigns the task or the worker chooses them wasn't related to anything. So we kind of didn't go really further with that one. So the results I'm going to show are with self-reported task assignments. So the higher the score, the more algorithms determine your task, okay? So what we found is that there was 2 pathways to the outcomes. One was that self-reported, the more algorithms determine your tasks, the more you find it transparent, and that increases your feelings of autonomy. Remember, this is cross-sectional, so I'm making big statements here, and that reduces turnover intentions. However, task assignment also reduces your feelings of autonomy, and that in turn, the more autonomous you feel, the less burnout, the lower your turnover intentions. So it has both a positive and a negative indirect effect on the outcomes through relatedness and through autonomy. So there's a bit of good and a bit of bad about it. In terms of pay assignment, we use both variables. So just like the other one, when pay is determined by the app, it's coded as 0. When workers set their own rates, it's coded as 1. And the one question we asked about self-report was that the higher the score, the more the app determines your pay. So they are kind of reverse coded. So remember that for this. So what we found is that pay assignment was only directly related to the outcomes. There were no indirect effects through need satisfaction. And we also considered here how just they found the pay determination to be. So what we find is that the more the app decides on your pay, the lower your burnout, no matter if it's self-reported or our own assessment of the websites, on the websites. And turnover intentions are also lower when the app decides on your pay. So we kind of attribute that to the fact that, again, when workers determine their pay, they have to bid low to get any work at all. The performance contingency perceptions, so, my pay is determined by my past performance, was positively related to the outcomes. Well, it leads to good outcomes. Not very in line with self-determination theory, you're going to tell me, but it seems to be attributed to the fact that people find it more just that way. And again, it could be a function of when you determine your own pay rate, you have to bid low to get anything at all. So that's kind of how we're seeing this at the moment. And I guess one little thing, if I can go back, is that this effect goes through mostly relatedness and autonomy. Nudging. So nudging is coaxing or gently encouraging someone to do something. And on apps, it's usually done through push notifications. So I'm showing you 2 examples of Uber push notifications trying to encourage workers to work longer or to work in certain areas to get more work. So this is what it looks like on these apps. We asked questions about this, and it's a bit off on the screens here, but that's okay. So the app influences me to log in or discourages me to log out, so working longer or longer periods of time. My working hours are influenced by incentives. So there's on many apps like surge pricing, where you can make more money if you work certain periods of the day when there's more demand. So they pay people more to take on tasks. So these are ways in which they nudge people to get on the app, stay on the app for longer, to get more work. You can probably imagine that we would think as self-determination researchers that this is probably a controlling, something that would control people. And that's what I thought. I thought nudging's bad. Like I was convinced that it was. But actually, there's a kind of two sides to it. Nudging is positively related to burnout. So yes, it can have that negative effect. However, it was highly related to feeling more related. Thank you, 5 minutes. It was highly, positively related to feelings of relatedness. And that in turn led to good outcomes, lower turnover intentions, and more organizational identification, which means I identify with this, with Uber or whatever it is, like the app that you work on. There was also, without going from nudging to burnout, there was just this relationship between relatedness and burnout, but that wasn't going back with an indirect effect through to nudging. So that's why it's a dotted line. So our initial interpretation of these results is, first of all, always keeping in mind this is a highly educated but underemployed young crowd, not necessarily relying solely on gig work, but it could be using it as a springboard or doing this while you're studying type thing. So we probably need to ask more questions about why they decide to do gig work in our next study, hopefully. And the other thing I think that is quite salient in our results is that the need that needs more attention is relatedness. First of all, it's low. And second, it's the one that's most related to the outcomes. Autonomy seems also to have some importance. And gig work appears to be lonely because just the app sending you these little notifications of nudging, and all of a sudden you seem to feel like, ooh, it's paying attention to me, this is amazing. So I don't know, like this is my interpretation at the moment, but we need more research to fully understand this and see if that's why they feel so good when they get nudged. And like the algorithmic management task assignment and pay determination does affect the needs and the outcome. Well, cross-sectionally, with, we can't determine causality here. So it seems that algorithmic management determination doesn't make things worse for workers because when they determine their own tasks and their own pay, there's other problems. So that's probably what the platforms need to work on, is making sure that workers are not disadvantaged when they choose their own tasks and set their own pay. And that seems to be due to competition, very high competition on these apps to get work at all. And transparency, appropriateness, and fairness are quite important. So when app platforms design these algorithmic management functions, it's important for people to understand them, to find how it's done to be appropriate and fair. So in terms of future research, I'm definitely interested in knowing more about nudging in gig work and on these app platforms. Why does it make people feel more connected? Is it because they feel more valued or cared for by the app when they receive these little messages? So that's one hypothesis that we could have. I would like to know more about the competitive nature of different forms of task assignment and pay determination, as well as the kind of like this balance between fairness and control from algorithmic management. I think it would be really nice to do diary studies And one thing we failed to do that might be important is we're not controlling for work design. And there are, like, the difference in terms of task assignment and pay determination is completely confounded with the type of work that they do. So we probably need to be more careful about that in our future research. In terms of the advice we can derive so far from this very exploratory study is if you're going to use AM in either on a gig work platform or in an organization, which that's another test that we have to do, make sure it's transparent and appropriate. And nudging, maybe there's a function, a good function that we can derive out of it. We just need to make sure we're designing it well, and so that it doesn't lead to burnout. Thank you.